On today's episode of the Going Commando podcast, we are back after a long hiatus, here to give you Commanders coverage following this season, changes in the coaching staff, changes in the front office, and a lot to look forward to in what should be a big offseason for our team. So without further ado, let's get this show started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another episode of the Going Commando podcast. My name is Clark, joined by my co-hosts Chris and Tom, and it has been a little bit of time since you've heard our voices over your airwaves. Of course, this season didn't quite end up how we thought it would. We last talked to you. Still kind of middle of the season. Jury was out on what was going to happen with the coaching staff moving forward, what was going to happen with the quarterback situation moving forward. And a lot of those questions have been answered. However, many have not as we enter the 2024 offseason. So just to start things off, one of the biggest stories of this offseason thus far has been the dismissal of Ron Rivera as head coach after his 4 years in Washington. No winning records, one trip to the playoffs, and ultimately not how we wanted to see our team progress. So let's just start with there. Ron is gone. How are you guys feeling about the direction of this team? With the chance for a new regime to come in.
Yeah, I'd have to say I'm unequivocally against this, and it's great to be talking to you boys again. Um, I'm unsure about this mainly because we have gone through a revolving door of coaches in the past. And while I didn't like Ron Rivera, there's not many options that I would necessarily like or feel that comfortable with. I certainly believe that there's guys like Mike Vrabel and other coaches out there who can get the job done better than Ron does. However, I'm not sure how many of them get us to our ultimate goal of being a playoff contender and taking us to a position of power within the NFC East. So I'll be curious to see how that all figures out.
Yeah, with all due respect to Ron, I'm very happy to see him go. I don't think we've had a very successful coaching staff or like sustained success while he has been here. I think we've just, we kind of grown tired of some of the mistakes we see time and time again, whether it's, game clock management, kind of what kind of players they're bringing in here and depending on to fill key roles, and just kind of just the overall kind of philosophy of his coaching. I don't really think it resonates well with a lot of what a lot of players are looking for, maybe even these days. And so I'm very happy to see him go. Wish him all the best, but it's time for a clean slate here in Washington. So very happy to be moving in a new direction.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, talking about his kind of style of coaching and style of leadership. There's an interesting quote that came out from Ron Rivera in the closing weeks of his tenure with Washington. And he said that for the first 3.5 years of this job, I was managing. And for the last 5 weeks, I've had to be coaching. That is, of course, in the wake of the dismissal of Jack Del Rio as defensive coordinator of this team. He was let go after the loss to Dallas on Thanksgiving. So, hearing a statement like that, how concerning is that? I mean, we know that he was involved in a lot of personnel decisions. Clearly, a lot of decisions didn't go right. I mean, we all remember Tom's reaction to the Emmanuel Forbes pick during our live special of the draft last year, and it's kind of turning out to be true thus far after the first year. A lot of weird personnel decisions, but um, want to talk about kind of that area as well going forward, especially now that there is a new man in charge, which I'm sure we'll get to talk about.
Yeah, and one of the big things about this Rivera regime was that, and we said it constantly, at least I know I did, and you boys intonated my same sentiment in private. You don't see Ron Rivera talking very much, and I think after what has it been 3 or 4 years, after 3 or 4 years, we got our first glimpses of Ron Rivera actually saying something on TV, which was a rarity that we and somewhat of a luxury, honestly, because he said it himself. He managed. He didn't coach. He was micromanaging the coaches. He was putting the players with their coaches and letting them do whatever they want, and it clearly led to disorder on the team. Um, and I know one room he didn't go into was the tight end room because we haven't been, producing anything out of there since Jordan Reed wore no gloves. But yeah, I gotta say I'm happy that that sort of mentality of micromanaging your players and staff is out of the head coaching position now. Do 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 I at least have a little bit of respect for the fact that Ron Rivera trusted his coaches like Jack Del Rio and Eric Bieniemy with that sort of autonomy? Yes. But at the end of the day, if the ship's not going in the right direction, which it clearly wasn't, you have to become the captain of the ship again. You're the head coach. You lead that crew wherever they're going to go to. So I'm not surprised Ron's let go. And after making a statement like that, I was very concerned because it means that people like me who are not in the organization can read what's happening inside the organization. And I think it's better when we don't know as much and we're just guessing because they are doing such, phenomenal work that we don't even know what they're thinking next.
I mean, personally, I think that that kind of statement Clark was referring to by Ron Rivera, I think that's a lot of just trying to, cover himself and like lip service. I mean, he's just looking for a job, honestly, at this point. So, so that's him just trying to say, oh, yeah, I actually, I like getting back to the basics. I'm a coach at heart. I wasn't as good at the whole, head coaching thing or, that's not my passion. Whatever he's trying to say, I think that's just lip service. He's trying to maybe get on as a coordinator or like, linebackers coach at the very least, maybe, if he's still interested in continuing his career. Um, I'm happy to see the guy go. I don't think that this kind of laissez-faire kind of attitude he had a lot of the time really worked out well. I don't think he, garnered. I mean, I think players respected him, but more as a person rather than like a directional leader and things of that nature. And it just kind of, as you saw, like, players began to kind of sour a little bit as the season progressed. And, that's when you need a good, really strong coach to come in and kind of squash that out and not let that kind of overtake your team. We almost kind of saw that and heard that from players in a lot of exit interviews as well. So I just think that the team needed a fresh, kind of slate. There will be some guys, and we'll kind of get to that later, obviously, who will still be here in the building, but it will overall look a lot different. And we've already seen some changes. Now obviously with Adam Peters being hired as the new GM, a guy who I'm actually very excited about. And the more I kind of like learn about him and his what he's been able to do at his various stops and kind of just hear others kind of give him praise, it makes me feel good about a guy like him being the first step that they take this offseason.
Hiring of Adam Peters certainly looks promising. Of course, a guy coming from an organization like San Francisco. But before we kind of get into some of the changes that are taking place around here and changes that are yet to take place around here, I wanted to get your guys' opinion on kind of just this season and kind of where things went wrong and why things went wrong. I mean, at the beginning of the year, we all kind of saw this team as, maybe a 7, 8 to 9 win range team, pegged in, maybe fighting for a wild card spot, obviously in a competitive division like the NFC East. But I don't know that any of us expected to see a 4 win team this year, coming off of a year where the team was vying for the playoffs in the final weeks of the season. Um, and in the beginning of the season, there start off 2-0, and you kind of look like a competent football team for a good chunk of this season. So I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on what do you think were the biggest reasons behind kind of the drop off, and um and why this season turned sour on us?
Yeah, I think you can boil that down to three simple things. Well, you have at the start of the season, and I know that you guys will remember this, and maybe the fans at home won't, but we start with Ron Rivera's series of press conferences where he seems to be saying too much, maybe trying to bury Eric Bieniemy to the media by telling them about how the players weren't necessarily enjoying the practices and so then coming out later and saying he shouldn't have said that, and that was a private conversation between the player and the head coach, which I don't think we've still got any confirmation on who that was that may have made that comment. Um, so you see a little bit of in-house sort of bickering between Rivera and Bieniemy at first. Then you get to the halfway point of the season, and I think really the issue here was Bieniemy's play calling. Sadly, I mean we were moving away from the run very quickly. We had players who were not doing uh we had players who were new to the system who were not doing the right things that were essentially hurting us in some ways, but really it was Bieniemy with all of these passing calls in situations, and we'd have three and outs where it'd be three downs of passing plays leading to a punt. And I think that's certainly not a way that you play winning football. I mean, if your passing game isn't working, at some point you have to look to the running game. And I'll give them credit down the stretch. They did that a bit more. But that certainly killed us in the middle of the season. And then at the end of the season, I would just have to say that, for this organization and this team to be making it to the playoffs, you have to beat the Cowboys at least once, and we didn't do that this season. I know that's certainly a wound that all of us wear as Commanders fans that we will have to suffer through. The Cowboys' annoyance of, well, you didn't beat us last year at all. And two very not close games. Um, so I think those are the three things that really set us back as a team this year.
Yeah, I mean, I first will, tie it back to the coaching. I'll echo what you said about Bieniemy. I think he's been a complete disappointment since bringing him in. I just really did not think he was really good with his play calling. I don't think he made good decisions or timely decisions with his play calling. He didn't make adjustments to it really. And he didn't play to the strengths of the team or like the players that he's dealing with. I mean, you had a complete kind of horrible additions to the O line that really, if anything, made them worse in Nick Gates and Andrew Wiley. Yet again, Rivera and company bringing in O line talent that is subpar what is really needed to have a successful core offensive foundation, and so that was a key problem that we had all season long, and it continued to really be up and down and kind of get worse as the season went on, with the exception of Sam Cosmi. Um, and then, it really, you also just saw, and again, this ties back to leadership of coaches, and you saw the team kind of just become what felt like demoralized as the season went on. You saw two star players and foundational leaders of this team be traded away right before the deadline, and Chase Young and Montez Sweat, right? And I think that deflated, a lot of the team too, and kind of maybe even gave the signal, oh, okay, this new ownership group really is kind of already writing us off this season, writing off this season, right? And so I think that could have been a factor as well that really kind of led to the derailment of the rest of the season at that point. And then Sam Howell, I think he was mismanaged. I think he's also shown us he does make mistakes, and he isn't perfect, and definitely had a rough patch there towards the end of the season. I think the jury's still out on him a little bit. I'm not a Sam Howell hater, but I also could very well see, them going in a different direction again next year. So I think it was a combination of things. I think again a gaping problem with this team is the offensive line, and I think you're going to see some changes there as well this year. I would be shocked if you didn't see some major changes there. And then, I think they need to
just bring in a coaching staff that can really kind of take control of a unit, and they're going to be bringing in a lot of their guys too as well. So again, it's going to look very different, but overall, those were the main reasons I think the season kind of got off the rails there a little bit.
A turning point, in my opinion, certainly was those trades of Sweat and Young. We get a second and third round selection in exchange for them. Clearly looking towards the future, clearly looking towards, having some new faces come in the building with, a decent amount of tools at their disposal to work with as to try to retool this roster and rebuild this franchise back up to where it needs to be. But but yeah, I mean, even with that, you now you question the existing players' ability to buy in. Um, and we'll see how that happens and how many of them are still on the roster. I mean, we saw Jonathan Allen, a guy who's been a captain of this team for a number of years now, kind of have some statements in the media where he was speaking, as if he would be open to the idea of be trading or wondered what it would be like playing for a different team. He had that quote come out. And then you just see like production of a guy like Deron Payne kind of dip this season significantly after he was given that contract. So a lot of these guys' future that have been the kind of foundational pieces, could be in question. Um, in terms of other guys like Terry McLaurin, I don't see him. I see him being a valuable piece for them, considering he's on extension, especially considering what they want to do with the quarterback position. There's still some players on this team that can make an impact. Um, but with that being said, you mentioned it, Chris, towards the end of your point. Um, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for whoever it is that comes into this job. But before they decide on who they want to coach this team, they did make a decision with the front office, that being Adam Peters, the assistant GM of the San Francisco 49ers, leaving his job in the Bay Area to come to Washington. A move that people around the league were very, there's a lot of high praise for this guy. He was a sought after candidate. And let's be honest, in years past, this is probably not a job that a candidate like this would have taken. So, um, what were you guys' reactions to seeing the Adam Peters news? And, given his background, not just San Francisco, he won a Super Bowl in Denver, and he's been a part of multiple winning franchises. So, um, what do you guys think bringing in a guy like this says about, um, how committed Josh Harris is to kind of rebuilding this thing? And what do you guys think Peters brings to the table?
Yeah, I guess I'll start off with that and just say that I'm excited for the Adam Peters hire. He was a guy who was really started his way through scouting, and then made his way up through the ranks with the 49ers to become sort of this very desired candidate. And I will say that of all the people that we could have hired, I think that this was a smart one. I mean, San Francisco is a team that especially now, looks to possibly have a few good years of deep playoff football, and they got Chase Young from us, which was, I think, maybe one of the smartest moves they could have pulled off, especially for what they were able to do to get that sort of player in the door with a third round pick. Um, I'm hopeful that he brings something to this team that we haven't had in a while, which is great drafting. Obviously we have the Snyder debacles of Snyder going with his guy, and sometimes his guy works to a degree, and sometimes it doesn't. I'm hopeful that they can figure out the right player for this number 2 overall position, which we will now be drafting at. And hopefully maybe they do some moves and possibly even move back um to get some more draft capital and really make the most of these next few drafts to try and find guys. That being said, I think it's a great person to have in the front office as we go through these coaching hires of a guy who's worked with guys, like Kyle Shanahan, who used to be in the building, and the Denver Broncos with Gary Kubiak and other coaches who seem to be able to at least leave a mark wherever they worked. So I'm hopeful that he is the right hire.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't know much about him, and then I looked into obviously some of the places he's been and what the staffs he's been a part of, and I really like it. He's got obviously ties to San Francisco and kind of the Shanahan tree, from his stop there, and then obviously has won in places previous before that. So there's nothing you can't like about that. Um, and then I've watched some of his kind of initial interviews that he's done, and he seems like at least at a face value, a smart guy, and I think they're trying to do this the right way. So I think Josh Harris went out and got a guy that's got a good resume and a guy that has a lot of endorsements from other folks around the league. So I like it. I'm very curious what he's going to do with this staff. There's still a couple people in the building that we maybe have expected to be gone by now as well. So I am curious what he's going to do. I think, I would pose the question to you all, who do you think is going to be the next coach that's brought in? I know it's, there's still some time. There's still currently playoffs going on. So teams, our guys are still actively, coaching who are possibly candidates as well. So who do you all think might be the candidate or most likely candidates and why?
In my opinion, um, I think Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator of Detroit, is the guy that they're going to zero in on. And for a couple of reasons, because we saw some reports of uh, the Commanders reaching out and requesting interviews with certain coaches, but that was kind of immediately, after Black Monday. Um, you see on that Monday, Black Monday, where Rivera was fired, rather. Josh Harris brought in some advisors. He brought in Bob Myers, former Golden State Warriors GM, who, of course, maybe not a football mind, but a guy that knows what building a winning organization looks like. And then Rick Spielman, a former GM of the Minnesota Vikings, longtime NFL executive. Those guys were brought in as advisors to kind of help find the next, people to be put in place to run this organization. And, hiring Peters was huge. Obviously, brings a breadth of experience to this franchise. But I say Ben Johnson because after that initial kind of rush of those guys getting hired and then they bring in Peters, we haven't really heard much else on the front of interviews and requests for interviews and whatnot. And I think that's because they're waiting for their guys to kind of become available. And obviously, with the Lions still in the playoffs, um, I think that they are waiting until they can get a chance to fully evaluate these guys in person after the season. So I wouldn't be shocked to see us kind of not hire someone until uh that team is season is complete. And I don't mind that either. They need to do their due diligence and pick the next leader of this locker room and this team. And um I'm not upset that they haven't necessarily decided that yet here a couple of weeks after the season.
No, I mean, I'm not upset by any means. I too think that the fact though that we haven't brought someone in yet at this point means that they think that their guy is, still on one of these teams that's actively playing this season and fighting for, a Lombardi. So I do think it's going to be one of the, some sort of coach, offensive coordinator, that is, still in the playoffs here. I do, I obviously have heard a lot about Ben Johnson. I do think that there is a chance for the Bobby Slowick um, hire as well. I think there is a little bit of attachment actually to Adam Peters there. Both kind of part of that Shanahan or have Shanahan ties rather. And then I believe Slowick was in San Francisco before Houston for a little bit as well. So he must, obviously a connection to Adam Peters there. But I've heard those two names, him and Ben Johnson as the primary candidates to that really they appear to be honing in on. But we'll see what happens. But yeah, very, very, very interesting stuff, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm not in a rush, as you say either. I'm not. I would like to, know obviously, so they can begin kind of their work as soon as possible on the roster and the future. But we obviously have time.
I think the only way that we can defeat the 2013 Washington Redskins coaching staff graphic is to bring one of those guys back. And Bobby Slowick is the newest addition to that group of coaches that you always see go viral every year. Oh, there's no way all these guys were on this one coaching staff. Turns out they were, and they were all under the Mike Shanahan / Kyle Shanahan tree. Slowick, no exception. I mean, look at what they've done in their this year in Houston. Obviously, Stroud, a mind you, a number 2 overall pick quarterback, by the way. Interesting fact there, considering where we selected this draft. Um, but yeah, he was in a small role with our team during that time, and um, if everybody always kind of it's a punching bag joke for our organization. Look at all these guys that we left. We were in the building and let go. Um, I wouldn't mind bringing one of them back to kind of shut everybody up. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be nice to finally get over that graphic, as you said, Clark. I'm not sure how I feel about Bobby Slovic, mainly just because there are guys like Mike Vrabel and not, as much as this is going to sound unpopular, Brandon Staley, who have been in this position and who have done this at the highest level, or at least levels higher than the Commanders. In recent years, who are available on that market. So I do hope that we make at least something of a splash here. I have also been hearing the Ben Johnson rumors, as you guys have, and I may be a little bit more what's the word that I'm looking for here? I may be a little bit more suspicious, I guess I will use, of Ben Johnson as our coach, purely because he doesn't necessarily have that same sort of NFL padded resume that some of these other guys may have. Now, maybe that could be a plus for a team like ours that is building and looking towards the future and maybe trying to find, different avenues or different ways to success. Like they've shown with the hiring of, as you said, Bob Myers from the Golden State Warriors, which I think threw all of us off a little bit when we first saw it. Um, but by God, if they do not find a coach to get them to the playoffs or at least get them beyond this 500 season mark that we always seem to be shooting for at best, then I'm not exactly sure what the heck we're doing over here. And I'm hoping that, this is, if he doesn't work out or if whoever we hire doesn't work out, that the ownership will be smart enough to either A, let them have a little bit more time to make it work, or B, get rid of them as soon as we can and move on to the next thing that will work or that at least has a better chance of working. That all being said, there's a very good chance that we end up with another Jay Gruden on our hands, and I'm not sure how many of us truly want that back.
Whoa, 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 whoa! I don't necessarily know if we want to be bringing up names like that. Although I will be honest with you guys, the thought did creep into my mind as this season was playing out. Was Jay Gruden a better coach than Ron Rivera for us? I think he was, actually. But that could be a topic for another day. Um, but yeah, Tom, you mentioned a couple names there, like Vrabel. I mean, that's a guy who obviously you would love to have in your locker room. He just seems like a true leader and just a really, a sharp football mind and a guy that players in the past have kind of bought in and wanted to play for. But the only concern that I would have is that you look at kind of our coaching history over the years, really over the past 20 or so years, for the most part, I want to say outside of like a Jim Zorn, which obviously is a horrible example. For the most part, we've hired coaches that have kind of had, some experience, and in most cases had head coaching experience at different uh, organizations as well. And I'm not sure that this group is going to be eager to bring in a guy like a Vrabel or, dare I say it, Belichick, someone like that with all that experience. You look around the league and you see all of these success stories of these young kind of offensive minds, in some cases defenses too, like D'Amico Ryans in Houston, but kind of younger guys that can resonate well with a locker room. And a lot of times it's worked. And I wouldn't be opposed to bringing in a guy like a Slowick or a Ben Johnson, as I mentioned, kind of in that same vein. Um, but again, I think I've gotten to the point with this team where I just want to trust Josh Harris and Adam Peters and the people put in place to make the right football decisions. And I actually do have faith in them to do a good job, which is something that I don't think any of us have really been able to say for the better part of 25 years with this franchise.
Yeah, actually, speaking of Jay Gruden, he was in the news a little bit lately just for apparently beefing with RG3 a little bit on Twitter or X or whatever, you want to call it these days. Um, I feel like I've seen that a little bit before, maybe even. So that's kind of interesting, but not important. Interesting, not important, as our former coach um, Ron Rivera would say. But what I really wanted to do also is look at the roster, as I mentioned earlier, and we all kind of mentioned. There's going to be a lot of change that happens um, during this offseason. So uh, I would like to kind of take a look, at a high level, the roster, both offense and defense, and kind of see who do we think is going to be a guy they bring back, who's a guy that is kind of on the fence, who's a guy we definitely don't think or don't want back in the room. So I mean, we can start wherever. I think obviously the obvious place to start is probably the quarterback room. Obviously has some shaky play from Sam Howell. Saw a couple glimpses of Jacoby Brissett. And so that's the room along with Jake Fromm, if you want to throw him in there currently. What do we think about that moving forward? Do we think that Jacoby will be here? I think is probably the biggest question. If Sam will be here or not is another huge question. Whether or not he's the starter, obviously, is a big question, and whether or not they bring someone in. I mean, so what are your all's thoughts? I guess briefly, we don't have to spend too much time on each group, but what do you guys think about the quarterback situation?
I mean, I think with the position that we're in with the draft this year and the talent that seems to be coming out of, there's a chance that we have a new addition to this room by the time that we get past the draft. I think Sam Howell played well enough, at least in his first year, to warrant being left on the roster and maybe even given a shot to compete with whoever we draft at the top. And it's interesting because this is a room that isn't very veteran heavy. I mean, you look at the guys behind uh um Sam Howell, and outside of Jacoby Brissett, I mean, there's just really no one who has true game experience and who can really lead these guys, or at least be a formative part of the development of these younger guys. And I think just looking across the offense generally, that's a statement that holds up pretty well. Obviously the receiver room is looking pretty dang good. I mean, outside of the play that we've had from our quarterbacks and running backs, I mean, they were somewhat the star of this team. I think the running back room is also another spot where you have a lot of young guys, and we're gonna have to be making decisions about, hey, who are the guys that we want on this team long term, and who are the guys that we ultimately are going to get rid of after this contract. And then you kind of already spoke to it a bit, Chris, but this offensive line has been pretty shaky, and the guys that we've added haven't necessarily helped us in the ways that we hoped that they would. And in fact, I would argue that the guys that we added have hurt us more than in past years. So I think that we have a lot of stuff to reevaluate on the offensive side of the ball, especially. But that quarterback room, um, certainly an interesting one given our current situation.
I've gone back and forth on whether or not, I think we should take a quarterback with that first selection. Sam especially, the first half of the season showed a lot of promise, um, albeit in a Eric Bieniemy offense that had him throwing the ball so much. And I think that definitely contributed to a lot of his stats that were looking promising. We saw him kind of on the top a lot of those passing yards graphics for a good chunk of the season. And then, of course, as his play dipped, so did those numbers. But I think that there was enough there that if the team elected to trade back and maybe try to build up more of the roster, if Adam Peters says, you know, we want to just build up the roster as good as we can, get some late round picks. Because one thing that this guy has a proven track record of doing is finding gems late in the draft. I mean, this guy he was a part of the staff that drafted George Kittle in the 5th round. Hufunga, the safety from San Francisco, was a late round pick. I mean, they have a lot of late round picks that have panned out well for them. Even Debo Samuel, I think, was 2nd round. But that being said, if we have the opportunity to take a quarterback that this staff views as generational and has a chance to really positively impact our franchise, I don't think you can pass up on that opportunity. I don't think that Sam Howell is, you know, necessarily a generational style guy. I think he's a guy that has proved he can play in the NFL. He just needs to prove that he can do it consistently. Um, However, if we're in that number 2 pick and let's say this quarterback is gone that they really, really loved, the last thing I would want to do is settle for another quarterback prospect that maybe we weren't as gung ho head over heels on just because we were in a top position and thought that quarterback was a position we needed to address. So I don't necessarily want to dive headfirst into any quarterback that comes onto our lap with that 2nd pick. I want to make sure that this is a guy that our organization believes could be a future star in this league. And something else that I have seen, which I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on. Not sure how I feel about it, but I've seen several mock drafts that have us actually trading up in this draft.
Yeah, and I think the quarterback thing, taking the quarterback at 2 or even trading up, as you just alluded to, I think you really only do that if you have a guy that you're sold on, and that's just it's your guy, and you're going to do whatever you can to make sure you get him. And we'll have to see if Adam Peters and company think that about a Caleb Williams or a Drake May or the kid from LSU or whoever. If there's a guy that they really like that they want to go and get, I think they'll do that. But I also think, hey, he's been part of a group that hit on Brock Purdy. Now, I obviously don't think that was the intention, but he's been, part of teams where they've, I guess, found quarterbacks of quality nature, not in the first round as well. So I don't know, what the philosophy really is at this point. I would be okay as well trading back, getting some value potentially for that pick. And if they take a developmental guy possibly, or riding with Sam Howell, or having it be a true, well, obviously this offseason it wasn't really a quarterback competition. Maybe there was a name, but not in actuality. It was really handed to Sam Howell. Perhaps a true quarterback battle. You bring Jacoby back, and perhaps even roll with Jacoby, for a year and see if there's another quarterback of the future that you like better the following year. Obviously, you have to take into consideration, what if you're not as in good of a draft position as you are this year? Next year, hopefully you're not, right? Hopefully you're not in the position we are. But there's a lot of questions there. So obviously, that's a lot of lot of discussion can be made over the quarterback room. But yeah, let's kind of take a look at this position by position. I would say, obviously, we've talked about quarterback, the running back room. Obviously, you have Antonio Gibson, a guy that is, I believe, just played out his last contract year with us, so I believe he's a free agent at this point. So I'm not sure if he'll be brought back. I personally do like Antonio Gibson. I think if he can be brought back on a relatively fair deal, I'd be for it. He obviously, he has his own problems, but I think overall he's a solid player that we kind of need in a role. become more of like a JD McKissick type role, but something better, hopefully. Obviously, B-Rob, he'll be back without a doubt. I would be shocked if he's not part of this team next year. Chris Rodriguez, I think he's shown a little bit of promise. I expect him to be back. I think overall, the running back room is one of the position groups that I expect probably not as much movement from. I think the biggest thing you could see is the departure of Antonio Gibson and the entry of another guy that they take maybe in one of the mid to later rounds. Who knows? Um, throw Alex Arma in there. He was a fullback that saw some time last year. I don't think he'll be with us as a Rivera guy. I don't think he'll be part of this team next year unless they implement a fullback, uh, heavy offense where, obviously they'll have their own guy that they like. So I don't know. Quick thoughts on the running back room, gentlemen?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel like Antonio Gibson was given a bit more of a role to shine with his tools under Bieniemy. Now, whether or not Bieniemy is held on to after this year will be a big question. But I think Gibson has shown his value as a pass catching back, and I know that I've had the take in the past that he should be moving back to wide receiver like he played in college. But I mean, if we can use him in some of the more versatile running back receiving ways that Bieniemy has kind of opened him up to in the newer offense, he could certainly stay on for value depending on whether or not he wants a big contract. I also feel like Brian Robinson. I mean, for a year that we didn't run much, certainly made his presence known on the field at times. Um, and certainly deserves a spot on this team as we move forward. Now, guys like Chris Rodriguez Jr., the rookie, and other guys who we brought in to fill that role traditionally in the past in the deep bench, I feel like a lot of them are going to be moved on from purely but just because they are unsure about the value that a guy like that brings to the team. I think the running back room is certainly one of our strengths, ironically, looking into the future.
Yeah, I wouldn't be upset to see any of these guys back. Obviously, Brian Robinson seems to be kind of the lead guy going forward. Gibson, again, I think that he might be able to get something on the market. I mean, the running back market over the last, couple of years has really kind of taken a hit. So it'll be interesting to see. There's a good chance possibly that we could bring him back on a team-friendly deal. Um, but just looking at the rest of this offense, I want to talk about the receiver room, which is a room that many thought was kind of our biggest strength heading into this season. Obviously, Terry did end up getting his 1,000 yards, albeit kind of took a lot. It was pretty close. Almost didn't get it there at the end. Curtis Samuel showed some flashes. I believe he's an impending free agent again. And Jahan Dotson, who had a solid rookie season, was a bit more quiet this year. Um, I want to hear your guys' thoughts on some of those guys. It was kind of some of the dip in production from this room as a result of the offense and scheme, or even considering that we were throwing the ball a lot. So I kind of want to hear your guys' thoughts on the direction of the receiver room.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that the receiver room, the guys that you kind of expected to lead that room had overall, I think, disappointing seasons on an individual level. I think one thing Sam Howell was kind of good at was spreading the ball around to a lot of different folks. So, he wasn't necessarily leaning on one guy to run the offense through. Whether that's the right thing or wrong thing, I don't know. Very glad Terry got his 1,000 yards, but like you said, it was really the second to last play of the last game, I believe, that he got it. So it really came down to the wire there. That's not indicative of a good season really for Terry McLaurin. He's capable of so much more, I believe. Looking, obviously Terry will be back. Jahan will be back. Expected a lot more out of Jahan, and I don't know how much of that is a talent thing. He had some drops, I remember, at least earlier on in the season, and then just was kind of absent from the stat sheet. A lot of times it felt like. So he'll be back, obviously, and I hoping for a bounce back third year out of Jahan. I would like to see Curtis Samuel back similarly, as you alluded to earlier, to Gibson, if it were in a team friendly kind of contract situation. I think maybe he's shown a little bit that he's got some juice in the tank. So I wouldn't be surprised if another team tries to come and offer him a somewhat competitive deal. I don't think he's going to garner a huge contract by any means. So curious to see what happens there. If he leaves, I think you do need to bring in a guy to help you out, or potentially draft a guy in the mid rounds if you don't expect to have Curtis Samuel back. Unsure, what Adam Peters thinks about him. He is a Rivera guy, after all. De'Ami Brown, I think he's got one more year on his rookie contract, so I think he will be back, if they don't decide to do anything with him, right? I think he would be back. Maybe they look to him to kind of fill that Curtis Samuel role and say, all right, De'Ami, like, on paper, you've got the same kind of skill set here. This is your shot to kind of show us what you got. So I could see them doing that. Jamison Crowder, obviously part of this group this season, was one of the fun things to have going on this in an otherwise very abysmal season. To see old Crowder back in a Washington uniform, I don't think you see him back. I wouldn't mind having him back as that kind of fifth, sixth receiver depth piece just for old time's sake. But I don't think you see him back. And rounding out the group here of what I would consider active roster guys is Byron Pringle, a Bieniemy guy. So I don't know if you see Pringle still here if Bieniemy goes elsewhere. Maybe he goes with him. Not to say I think he's a quality depth guy from what I was able to look at. And then Mitchell Tinsley, one of I think the only undrafted free agent to make the roster this year, if I'm not mistaken, as a rookie. Did not see. I don't think I saw him inactive in a single game this year. So maybe he sticks around, maybe he doesn't. Again, part of that Rivera era. So we'll see on that. I don't know. Y'all's thoughts?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned it there. A bit of a disappointment from this room. And, we talk about these team-friendly deals. Unless we hire a coach that kind of sweeps these guys away, I don't know that there's much incentive for them to take team-friendly deals with us, unless they just truly love the direction we're going and want to stick around. I wouldn't be shocked to see Curtis Samuel test his value on the market. Um, and although he's a talented player, I think over time, he's the guy whose production can hopefully be replaced. Um, and I wouldn't want to devote too much, cap space to him. Also considering we have the most cap space in the NFL headed into this offseason. So we really have a lot of room to make things happen. If it takes an egregious contract to bring him back, I'm not sure how comfortable I would be with that. Now, rounding out our pass catchers, the tight end room. This is a room that's been hotly debated amongst us on this podcast for honestly, it seems like the entirety of its existence, and it also seems like for the entirety of this podcast existence, our tight end room has been exactly the same. You see Logan Thomas, you see John Bates, and you see Cole Turner. Um, Logan Thomas at times has the ability to make good catches. He also has the ability to have untimely injuries. I don't think he really got as injured beat up this year, but clearly with just the inconsistency of play on the field as the team as a whole, you know, I could see this guy maybe getting a contract elsewhere. But again, with his age, I don't know that he's gonna be brought back under this new regime. And then young guys like John Bates and Cole Turner. John Bates, serves a role on this team, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination he can be your tight end one going forward. So um, yeah, I think this is another position that is going to need to be addressed, and I would not be shocked to see a completely new starter, maybe even a lot of new guys in this room next year.
Yeah, and I think going back to the comment we made about Curtis Samuel, I mean, the tight end room and the wide receiver room has seen a lot of guys um who have had these sort of years where they're at the end of the contract and they seem to have a little bit of an upswing. And I think we kind of saw that at least in the latter to middle parts of the season with Logan Thomas. Now, ultimately, I hope that this entire tight end room gets a little bit of a makeover in some ways. I certainly don't think that a guy like Logan Thomas is anywhere within our time frame. guys like Cole Turner and John Bates are so young and they haven't shown so much as to make themselves overly valuable. So maybe that does lead to more team friendly contracts, like you say, Clark, and hopefully guys like Curtis Samuel and Logan Thomas, if they're looking for, a relatively big contract, nothing crazy, obviously, because of who they are, but bigger contracts. Hopefully, we have the awareness to move on from them. And the draft capital to be able to bring in some younger guys, or at least a different look in some way, whether that is through free agency, like you said, in order to really get this thing going and really, bring an energy back to the franchise on offense, with the passing game that we haven't necessarily had at times. So,
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see that whole tight end room actually gone and replaced. So even though if I do like a couple of the guys we have in there, I would not be surprised to see that completely removed. Shifting to kind of the rounding out, I guess, the offensive side of the ball, the O line. I don't think you see Charles Leno back this year. He's old. He's consistently beat. I don't never really been a big fan of him or his play, so I don't think you see him back. Cornelius Lucas, primarily the swing tackle backup. I actually like Corn Lucas, kind of a Corn Lucas, fan over here, but I don't think you see him back just because he's got no ties to the staff. He's also on the older side as well. Wouldn't mind having him back, but I don't think you see him. Chris Paul kind of started overall the majority of the games at left guard. Sadiq Charles was also a name you saw at that position a lot this season. I don't think you see Sadiq Charles back because I believe this is a contract year for him, if I'm not mistaken. And Chris Paul, maybe you see him back in some sort of depth capacity. I think they're going to look to upgrade both the left tackle and left guard positions this offseason, as well as the center. Tyler Larson, you do not see him next year. Definitely an old Rivera guy, and kind of almost crazy that we still see him hanging around this team, at this point as well. It was really due to the Nick Gates disappointment this year. I almost think they dump him off or really relegate him to a primarily, backup guard center role, and maybe even restructure his contract a bit because he was just so abysmal. Obviously, Cosme will be back at right guard. I think that's the only guy, with maybe the exception of Andrew Wiley, that you see back in their starting role next year, just because we gave him kind of a big contract. But again, with this new ownership and management, anything's possible. They could dish him. They could just straight up cut him, ask him to take a restructure. Who knows? And then the other backup, Trent Scott, we saw him get a weird amount of play actually at the end of the season as well. I don't think you see him back either. So a lot of change expected, in my opinion, on that offensive line. Any comments before we go to the defensive side, fellas?
Yeah, I hope to see that addressed in the draft. They tried a little bit here and there to draft some guys, but for the overwhelming majority, a lot of this offensive line under Rivera was kind of patchwork with random veterans being brought in every year, and it never really worked. Um, our offensive line under Gruden actually was pretty good for a number of years. We had some stalwarts, of course, none of which are still here. But the way that line was built was through the draft, with drafting a guy like Scherf and drafting a guy like Trent Williams, of course, way back in the day. So I hope to see that area kind of addressed. Wouldn't be upset to see high draft picks used on the offensive line, as I do think that, all things considered, that position group is probably arguably the weakest of any on the team.
yeah, and I think I was hoping for lower draft picks here purely because that would allow us to, or not, sorry, not a lower, but a rather a higher draft pick. Um, later into the first round, purely because I thought that would allow us to address the offensive line uh in the manner that it should be. Now that we have the second overall pick, this draft is somewhat um quarterback heavy, I guess you would say, in some ways. I mean, there's a lot of guys who could fit into our plans, especially with their age and the talent that they would bring to the team. But now, I certainly hope they see a lot of these guys moved on from. I know that guys like Andrew Wiley, who just signed deals, and Nick Gates are probably likely to stay. But I would hope that they would make a lot of moves this offseason to kind of shore up that offensive line, as it were, and really, you know, make a statement to the fans that they're trying to win now rather than later, and looking towards a team which can develop and grow together, like the youth that they will be focusing on, at least I believe, in the future.
Let's change gears to start talking about the defense. First group I want to talk about, and I think it's the group that probably commands the most attention. Uh, based off they tried to fix it, um, but ultimately I think it's the most inconsistent group. That is our secondary. You took a first round pick on Emmanuel Forbes. So he's going to be under contract. I believe Cameron Curl is going to be in need of a contract. Um, you had a guy like Derek Forrest kind of out for all of this season. Kendall Fuller, kind of one of the only guys that showed any consistency, although he's kind of a aging veteran at this point. So, where does the cornerback and safety rooms go from here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a position group that you saw us invest draft capital in the past few years. I mean, you bring it up with Derek Forrest. Um, I think that when you have guys like Derek and as well as Emmanuel Forbes at your youth, that you have at least something of a future put together. I mean, I know Emmanuel Forbes was very disappointing this year at times, and you know, he's a rookie. He's going to have these moments. But I think this is another group that definitely could be upgraded in the future, whether that's through the draft or through the free agency that will be looming on us soon here. Um, I'm curious to see whether or not we can really draw in some big name guys in this area, because it does seem to be an issue for us in the past of poor pass play by our cornerbacks, and guys like William Jackson the third coming in from free agency, who might not necessarily fit with our schemes, but he's meant to be a good player and a good young guy, and they seem to flutter out after the free agency period, and really starting to work with this team, and get these guys in younger, and make sure that they fit our scheme, most importantly, will bring us a lot of positive growth and success in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of questions with the secondary. Um, as you guys kind of mentioned, new coach coming in, new defensive coordinator will be in the building, obviously, and yeah, they will have a completely different scheme and kind of concepts and direction of what their defense is, and maybe a lot of these guys become obsolete. There's already a lot of questions around guys like Cameron Curl, what being brought back, guys like Kendall Fuller being brought back. Do you see St. Juice, still in the building? Forbes, kind of up in the air a little bit on him. I think you see him just because there's, he's pretty raw. I actually kind of like what I saw out of Quan Martin, Jartavius Quan Martin, at the end of the season there. So I think you see him back. I think a lot of the guys in the back end, Christian Holmes, Tariq Castro Fields, guys like that. I think you don't see that those guys return by any means. Percy Butler, do you see him come back? I don't think he's been that good for us. You probably don't see him come back. Derek Forrest, a guy that was gone a lot of the season. I wouldn't be surprised to see him brought back if he's healthy, and see what he's able to still provide in one way or another. But yeah, overall, I think you see a lot of change in this group. Kind of moving into the next level of your defense, linebacker room. This was a room we felt very shaky about coming into this season, and rightfully so. With the departure of Cole Holcomb, arguably our best linebacker, we didn't really do much to replace him, bringing in Cody Barton, kind of a glorified version of David Mayo, if you ask me, both of which saw way too much time on the field in starting capacities this season. So I don't think you see either of those gentlemen back this next season. You might even clean house with the exception of Jamin Davis. Khaleke Hudson, maybe they bring him back. You see some flashes there. Maybe they bring him back. If there's no interest from other teams on him. Any of those back end roster guys, Scooter Harris, Dijon Harris, whoever you want to say him, any of those guys like that, they will not be here next year. Jabril Cox, who knows? But yeah, you'll see some additions. I'd be very concerned if Jamin Davis is still the most accomplished or touted linebacker in that room next season.
The linebacker room is obviously one that we've spent a lot of time talking about, and I think, you do go back to that Cody Barton signing, and you think that maybe we might have, sold a horse for a pony here, and getting rid of Cole Holcomb and getting a guy like Cody Barton, and I mean, you make the point again of David Mayo. I mean, it's almost sad to say, but I think we have a chance at seeing him here again, sadly. Um, if we aren't careful about who we choose to replace these guys with. Uh, the linebacker position is one that honestly doesn't have that many high value guys in the league playing it, and I think that when you look at this draft class and our position, we obviously don't necessarily have the spot to address that currently, and we don't have our second round pick too, which means we can't get a late first round guy, or late first round type talent rather, that would be able to put a stopgap into that wound that we have. I think that the linebacker position definitely needs to be rehauled. I agree with you, Chris, that a lot of the play was poor there, and that a lot of these guys don't deserve to come back, at least from what they showed us last year. And I'm not exactly sure how they address that. That is a position of need for sure, without necessarily any obvious people coming to mind of like, this is the guy that we need, or that. And I think that will really depend on what the coaching hires will look like down the line. Because I think this regime really wants, guys who are going to contribute and be big members of the team. Um, so we'll be curious to see who they do decide to give contracts to in the future, and really seem to I hope they really seem to build this team in the correct way, especially when it comes to the linebacker position, given our gripes in the past.
I do think that this linebacker group is kind of the one position group that you could see possibly the most turnover. Um, as Chris mentioned, maybe with the exception of Jamin Davis is still on a rookie contract, but everyone else I would not be shocked to see out the window. And then as for the defensive line, this was of course the heralded Washington defensive line for a number of years. That was kind of the cornerstone of our team, and what we built through the draft was this great defensive line. And now looking at it, both of those edge rushers gone. Allen and Payne still there, both of which had definitely a drop off in production this year. Um, so there's some younger guys. You drafted KJ Henry and Andre Jones, even a guy like John Ridgeway. Some of these guys that are young and on maybe rookie contracts, I could still see being in the building. Um, Something interesting to really consider is, do they want to move on from Allen and Payne? Um, two guys that were once thought to be, the cornerstones of our franchise. Uh, with a new regime coming in, is that going to be necessarily, there's a lot of money tied up into those two guys. Do they want to move on and try to create more roster flexibility? Or, um, you know, could a defense like this moving forward, use some veteran guys in the locker room that have been there in this organization and have proven to what they can do on an NFL field? Either way you look at it, I think there's definitely a chance that at least one of those two could be moved on from this offseason.
Yeah, and this defensive line room is, it's almost sad to look at nowadays without guys like Montez Sweat and Chase Young filling out some of the edge roles for us. Um, there's definitely a lot of names in free agency who will be thrown around. And hopefully we do look to use some of our cap on those guys as well, because I definitely don't believe that by having Deron Payne and Chase, or sorry, not Chase Young, by having Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen there, that you have really a defensive line that you can just not, touch or work on. I think that those guys do need compliments on the edge, and I'm not sure we necessarily have that with guys like KJ Henry, or some of the younger guys on roster who have been filling in roles here and there. I mean, heck, even Fedarian Mathis might get some run if they decide to put Jonathan Allen on the edge, in some sort of bizarro world, scheming. Now, once again, do I think that we really did choose to devote capital to this position? Probably not. But that is that is thinking in the past, which is the Dan Snyder Redskins and football team and Commanders who didn't make the positive moves towards winning. So once again, I think this ownership has shown to do some good things in the coaching mix up, and I think hopefully in the hiring and signing contract department, they can continue to be successful and really put us towards a position to succeed, with this defensive line being at its current state. I'd say at least halfway there, if not even closer than that.
I actually think this is a position where they likely do address. I mean, obviously with the departure of two skilled edge rushers in Montez Sweat and Chase Young, I think this is a position that they likely do address in those first few rounds of the draft. I wouldn't be surprised to see an edge rusher taken maybe in the second or third round for this team. I think the current guys that they have in those positions either won't be here next year. Guys, like James Smith Williams, Casey Toohill, maybe one of those guys is brought back. I'm not totally certain on those guys' contract situations either. And obviously the young guys from later rounds, this past draft, KJ Henry and Andre Jones Jr., those guys I think will be here. But again, I don't think they're guys you can lean on to kind of step up into starting roles, maybe right off the bat. So would not be surprised to see an edge rusher taken in the draft, if not multiple, and as well as maybe a guy brought in through free agency to kind of help shore up that position. I think you also have the potential to see a defensive tackle taken maybe in the later rounds of this draft as well, to as insurance potentially for a Jonathan Allen departure, whether that's this season or beyond. F.A. Obata, I believe he had a pretty bad injury at some point during the season, so I'm not sure on his status. Or if he's even able to continue playing. John Ridgeway, that's a name. Curious if he'll be brought back. He's young, so that's a positive. But again, definitely a guy that the former staff was really high on. Don't know if the staff will see that the same way. And then obviously Fedarian Mathis, a guy that I do expect to be here, but likely in a depth capacity, unless he really starts to wow this new staff. So yeah, I think that they'll do a little bit of work there. If I'm not, I could be wrong, but I would be surprised if they didn't do a little work there as well, especially on the outside.
All right, I think that's going to do it for this episode of Going Commando. It had been a while, so it was great to get to talk to you guys again about our favorite team, albeit after a season that we probably want to forget. But definitely, if you're listening and a fan of this podcast, there'll be more content coming out the pipeline this off season. As soon as a head coach is decided for this team, you will be hearing from us about it very promptly. So stay tuned, and there's going to be more Going Commando content coming down the way. So for myself, Clark, my co-host Chris, and Tom, this has been the Going Commando podcast. Thank you for listening, and as always, HTTR and HTTC.